How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So I really want to talk about tier limit and the fact that it's just the undisputed best deck, and going over a lot of different lines of play. Also, just talking about the format in general, even my list from the regionals this weekend, talking about what are the different things that are going on in the meta, and then what I could really see the meta turning into with Kashtira. Then also just having a conversation about Floodgates in general at the moment. Are they strong enough? So I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already checked out the sponsors over on Imperium Duelist, Dragon Shield, or Gem, definitely go ahead and do so, all down in the description below. And if you haven't already heard, when we hit 16,000 subscribers, we're going to be giving away the Player's Choice Spellground, which is going to be an amazing thing to give away. So I really do hope that we hit our goal. Again, just 16,000 subscribers. If you haven't already subscribed, definitely go ahead and subscribe. Without further ado, top right on into our first topic. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be Zeus, and this is a card that just really came up this weekend a whole lot, and not for the reason that you may think. So I got into about 5 or 6 different games where this one line of text got me like 6 wins, and it's because a lot of people don't know that this is actually the wording of Zeus. So Zeus says, once per turn, if an Xyz monster battles. So it doesn't have to be your own monster. So for example, if you have Shiren on the board and then your opponent has a Dweller, and then you use Shiren to attack into Dweller and like run it over. If you go main phase 2 and like normal summon a Rhino, you can overlay for like Baguska and then just overlay Zeus. Or if you're playing against tier, you can overlay for Dweller and then overlay Zeus, which is pretty crazy. And a lot of people don't know that you can actually just do that. This is something that actually just comes up quite a bit, and it's actually really insane just because of the fact that your opponent won't necessarily try to clear your board if you just try to attack over Dweller, because that's something that's just going to happen regardless. And it's really just a matter of extension versus like what your opponent could have past that, or if they're just baiting battle phase to swing over a Dweller, or even like one of your Xyz monsters. And so this like actually just comes up quite a bit, and this is something that you really have to know. This is actually just one of the craziest things to know going into a match. This line of text right here is probably the most broken thing about Zeus, I think. And the fact that the second that anything battles an Xyz, you're able to just go ahead and just wipe the board, which is really nice and something that not a lot of people know. So make sure that if you are going to a tournament, that you understand that this is something that you can do and utilize that to its fullest potential. The next thing is going to be talking about a really great line in the mirror match. I like this line a lot. I've heard this a couple of different times, but a lot of people still don't know this. So something that you can do is if you already have Kikalos on board, you can go Shiren and then you pitch Rhino Heart, and then you use Rhino Heart's effect to reborn itself, but you don't use the effect of Rhino on summon. You overlay with Shiren and Rhino Heart to make Dweller. You detach Rhino to use Dweller's effect. So now your opponent's under Dweller, you have Dweller and Kikalos. And so you can even hit one of your names off the Shiren in the graveyard, of course, to go ahead and make that Kikalos. But this is also really good if you have like instant fusion. So your opponent's under Dweller, you have Dweller Kikalos. Now you go Kikalos effect, then you bring back Rhino. And now you can safely go your Chainlink 1 Rhino, Chainlink 2 Kit. If you mill your Yugioh or your Kelbeck, you can safely mill 5 off of both players' decks, which is even crazier because even if they mill like Keldo and the Magnamot, they no longer can get rid of the Magnamot out of their graveyard. Of course, that doesn't really account for Bistrels in their hand, but it just opens up the lines even more to go into like Dark Summon back the Magnamot, and then go into Sprint if you need Merly effect, or just to go into an Elf. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with this line of play. Again, you just wait really long before you use your Rhino effect, but it does pay off in the end. I think that it's really nice because you can even just go ahead here and normal the Rhino and then special the Shiren. And at that point, you can go ahead and do the whole play anyway. And you just like never use the effect of Rhino until you bring it back off the Kitalos, which is really insane. I think that's really cool. This line of play actually comes up quite a bit. So this is something that I definitely recommend doing. This is something that is just overall a really solid line of play. So talking about the metagame in general and like really what you should be expecting in your main deck at the moment, you should be running probably 6 to 8 Bistrels no matter what you're playing. The Bistrels are just actually insane, being the free rank 6s that they are, and just being 6s on the board. If you are playing tier, then you can overlay with a Garura, and then you get like the Magnamot search, you get the Garura draw, you can go into cards like Wallow and steal tactics out of your opponent's graveyard. I was playing against Sprite, my opponent hit me with Ash Imperm, I made Wallow and then took their tactics out of their graveyard and then ripped their only play out of their hand. It was the craziest value I've ever seen. And these cards, they're just so insane. And now we're getting another Bistral, and that's even crazier because that means that you can run a maximum of 12 Personally, I think all the Bestials should just be limited because these cards are essentially dangers, and if dangers should all be limited, like the really insane ones, these probably should be as well. Because there was a lot of situations too where like my Bestials would get like bounced back to my hand and I could just like use them again. So it's really crazy. These cards are just way too good for what they are, what they do, especially even Druid Swarm. The fact that it sends, it doesn't destroy. So if your opponent has like a dark on the board, you can actually just Druid send it and it won't trigger the dark. And that's another thing that a lot of people just don't know. So if you don't know that, there you go. Tactics should be a 2 or 3 in the main deck for sure. That card's insane. It's just so good, the value you get off of it. If you're in a really bad position and you're stuck under like a Baguska, you can take the Baguska. Or if you're stuck in a really awkward situation, you go ahead and get some draws. Or if you already have a really solid combo that you can follow up with, you can rip the only other play out of your opponent's hand and then go ahead and make your full board. So Tactics overall is just such a solid card this format. It's really necessary to play this. I think at least you run 2. I think 2 is all I'm going to run, but 3 is just really making sure that you do see it. But Tactics overall is one of the best cards this format has to offer. The next thing too is I think in anyone's sideboard right now that isn't main decking any kind of a Shizu variant should be siding 2 Keldo, 2 Mudora, because once your opponent finds out that you're not playing like tier, they're just going to go ahead and mill out your deck because there's no reason not to at that point. And this is just something that's really good for the punish and the side to really make sure that you're able to play and really get through the plays that you need to do. And this is just really insane interruption on your opponent. Again, these cards really make sure that you don't lose to tier, or at least they help you really put up a good fight against tier. So this is something that I definitely recommend. 6 to 8, 2 to 3, and then 2 and 2 in the sideboard. Definitely important here. I'm talking a little bit about Floodgates. I think that it's really interesting because of the fact that Skill Drain, Macro, and D-Fissure, these are all cards that are absolutely broken by themselves. Floodgates are insane. These 3 in particular are crazy. But even looking at the 2 regionals I played in this weekend, 18 rounds of Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't see any of these one time. And that's something too where like even Fluanderies has a really bad problem with breaking already. And so if you're going to be playing these cards too, it's really not helping your strategy at all. And it's really not solving the problem that the deck already faces. So I really don't see these cards doing anything in the meta at the moment. They might be played in like Kashtira, but I really don't think that they're going to be that relevant. They're really solid in like stun decks, I guess. But at the end of the day, Floodgates just really aren't that crazy. If you flip Rivalry against the tier deck, you still have the ability to go into cards like Rukalos, and if you have Field Spell, you can pop the Rivalry. If you flip Gozen, then there's still like a ton of dark monsters that you can summon too. So there's just not a lot of good Floodgates at the moment, and that's pretty crazy because when the best deck can just mitigate so many different Floodgates, it's actually just so wild to see like how the deck can really fare against the format. And there's a lot of situations, even my buddy playing against Macro and Necro Valley, when cards like Zeus are still a thing, or even Baguska just to put in defense, against most stun decks, like they can't play the game. So these cards are pretty good, but it's pretty interesting to see at the moment how they're just not really being too impactful. So talking a bit more about Kashtira, this is really cool just because of the synergy that we see here and just the fact that we have so many cool rank 7s in the game. Even looking back at how Masquerade was so annoying and branded, and now we have the opportunity to go into Flare Dragon, which would be equally annoying and really crazy too. We also have the ability to go into things like Dracosac, we have Big Eye. There's a lot of different cool plays out there already. So the only really cool counter that you can do to things like Unicorn is by playing double Kakalos, because of the fact that Unicorn does rip one face down, and if you're only playing 1 kit, then you essentially just like lose the game. But if you're playing 2 kit, then it just puts your opponent in a really awkward position, because at that point you're like, oh, I banished one of them, but you still have the other one, you know? So it's really nice to still have the option to go into your Kakalos. I highly recommend going ahead and still just running 2 for the foreseeable future. It's just going to be able to save you in those games where you do run into cards like Kashtira Unicorn. And of course, after February, that's going to be in a lot of decks. So you really want to make sure that you're prepared for that. In the OCG, we saw that it was really popular to run cards like Mind Control and Talents to go ahead and just take control of the Shangri-La. So this is another card that is really cool because it locks down 5 of your main monster zones, which is insane. And that just means that you just literally can't do anything. But it's kind of like remove brainwashing when you control a kaiju, that at that point you can take the Shangri-La, and that at that point the card will go to the graveyard by game mechanic because you have no spots to put it. And then you essentially are just breaking through the board, which is a really cool way to go about it with cards like Mind Control, Change of Heart, Talent. These are all things that you really want to keep in mind for this format, because a lot of times your main monster zones are going to get locked out, not your back row. It's going to be really hard if you want to play like Draco Slayer, even, because even one pendulum scale gets locked and it's just over. So it's pretty crazy. This deck's going to be pretty insane. But just know that there's a lot of outs to this already, as far as like the pure Kashtira deck, and just having cards like Mind Control, Talents, Change of Heart to really just go ahead and take control of that monster. Automatically will send it to the graveyard, and then all of your zones will become unlocked. And then of course you can go ahead and play the game from there on. And then remember our ruling from earlier on too, if they still have the Arise card on board, if you attack into it, then you can go ahead and make the Zeus as well, which is pretty cool. Just another really nice option for you. But overall, I think that Kashtira is going to be really strong. Just the two in combination, we're going to see a lot of really cool builds. The fact that we also have Kashtira tier limit being the level 7 that it is, we're going to also see a lot of really cool rank 7 plays moving forward. So lastly, I want to talk about my list in the regionals this weekend. I am cutting Orange Light. I'm playing the second Talents. I didn't really like Orange Light. Orange Light was described to me as both simultaneously Gamma and Driver, and I thought that was the funniest description of this card possible. And the fact that it's only at 1 just makes it even worse. Every single time that I saw Orange Light in my hand, it was just always dead. It's just something that I didn't really want to see anymore. So definitely playing the double tactics instead will end up being the better way to go about it. Playing the second Scream would be pretty optimal, but I don't really think that it's so necessary. We do see a lot of people running the 3 Yugioh instead of 1. Some even playing 2. I think 1 is perfect. Honestly, I don't really want to see it more than that. You usually get sided out in the mirror match because you don't really want to have to mill that much against the mirror. Sometimes it's fine, but most of the time you don't really want to be in that position to really have to rely on the mill 5. In the sideboard, I thought that it was really smart to still play the twins and the droplets, because they still trigger things like the Yugioh and they still trigger the Kelbeck. So again, against any other deck that isn't tier, being able to just negate their monster and then get the mill 5s off is pretty insane. I brought up Wallow earlier, being able to steal cards like Tactics out of the graveyard. Of course, that's going to be the craziest skill possible, especially if you get Bish Shield and then you're just like, all right, cool, this Tactics about to go crazy. Gamma was really suboptimal. I thought that it was really strong in a lot of situations. The only reason that Gamma's still in my sideboard right now is because of Sprite. It just has such a good interaction with Sprite, being able to clear the monster and negate the effect, of course. Just something that I think is really nice to have against that matchup. The third Rhino Heart I added back in because I felt like it just came up enough where I just had so many hands where I'd open up like Keldo, Kelbeck, Guido, and then double Bishtil, which, I mean, that hand does a bit, and you have to rely on the mill 5, but at the same point, like, I just wanted to make sure I saw one of the tiers in my hand, and bumping up the third Rhino ended up being one of the best decisions of the weekend. Really was able to see just so many different playable hands, and even if you just see one Rhino and then a bunch of other engine cards, is really nice too, especially if it's like one Rhino, one Scream, you go kind of crazy. So also just having Crime and Solic in the main deck. A lot of people running 2 Solic. I don't really think that it's that necessary. I think running 1 is just fine. Usually I'm just pitching it to search. Having it on board sometimes is really cool too. The permanent negation off of it is really nice. A lot of people don't know that the effect of it is permanent, which is pretty crazy. Having the 2 Banshee, 2 Zombie World honestly didn't even come up outside of like one time. I was playing on Sword Soul and activated Zombie World and it won me the game, so that was kind of cool. Having the Beatrice summoned at one time didn't really come up a whole lot. Still a really solid card though. Other than that, the list is pretty generic. Having the 8 Bishtills, I definitely recommend having like 8 Bishtills in whatever deck you play, because if you open up 2 against tier, you just win the game automatically. That's just how that is, especially if one of them's mag. It's just like you're immediately winning that game. It's actually just insane, especially because if your opponent is utilizing resources to make sure that you don't summon it, at that point they're just putting themselves behind because they're wasting shufflebacks, they're wasting cards to just like clear your Bishtil, they're wasting their own Bishtils out of their hand to make sure that you can't Bishtil. So at that point, it's like, it's so crazy if you open up multiple. And that's another reason why Tactics is just so good with them too, because they just like make each other live, right? So like if you use a Bishtil, it forces out their Bishtil, and then you can Tactics your opponent, which is insane. And that's something that came up a ton this weekend, which I thought was really cool. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's video, just talking a bit more about the meta. I do appreciate each and every one of you being here on the channel. I can't wait till we hit our 16,000 goal. So if you haven't already subscribed, definitely go ahead and subscribe. If you haven't already joined my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, definitely go ahead and do so. If you want a coaching session over on Metafy, feel free to PM me on Discord if you have any questions, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful night, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thank you.